Hi, I'm Andrew Rodriguez, and welcome to PsychoBible. Uh, in my last video, which was an old sermon of mine, I made a point about how without God as your highest ideal, the inevitable result is nihilism. And then, coincidentally, after posting that video of a sermon from a few years ago, I ended up watching the movie Annihilation, which came out in 2018. So it was one of those movies that was on my list to watch. And this movie actually kind of haunted me for a bit. I really had a hard time sleeping after watching it. And my wife will tell you, I sleep like a rock. But I used to have some sort of insomnia when I was a little kid because my mind was so active. I just would stay up and I have a very active imagination. So I just looked at bedtime as my opportunity to think and come up with ideas. But I was just so active, I just couldn't sleep. And I think I had one of those moments after watching this movie. It just really hit me, and I just saw a lot of a symbolism in it. It just got my brain going. So I posted online on my Facebook page that, well, I just saw this movie. I'm going to have to process this a bit. And so now I figured, let me do a video about it. One of the things I've always wanted to do on this channel is analyze some films from a Christian psychology perspective. So, I guess this will be my first entry in what I will call PsychoBible cinema. Annihilation was released in 2018. The screenplay was written and the movie was directed by Alex Garland, based on the book of the same name by Jeff VanderMeer. It stars Natalie Portman, also has Jason Leigh, Gina Rodriguez, Tessa Thompson, Oscar Isaac, and Oscar Isaac was also in Ex Machina, another film by Garland, definitely another film that will mess with your mind. I loved Ex Machina, so I had pretty good expectations going into this movie when I found out he was the director. Now, immediately after watching the movie, I had my own intuitions about the meaning. So, of course, I go onto YouTube and I see what others had said. I read other film reviews, but mostly I wanted to get some analysis on the meaning. And I found some really good analyses that actually ended up differing from my own first impression. And that almost started to discourage me from, maybe I was off. But I also learned some cool things about the book that I think might actually support my initial thoughts. So, you may watch the movie and walk away with a different impression about the meaning, but I'm going to go with my guts, for lack of a better word. If you watch the movie, you'll know what I'm talking about there. And I don't know if my interpretation is what the writers of the book and the film intended, but even so, sometimes symbolism happens without us trying. In fact, that tends to be when symbolism really happens, when we aren't being that intentional about it. And really, in the first several minutes of the movie itself tells you the meaning. You see this a lot, especially in sci-fi movies, where the first few minutes, there are some key moments or dialogue that really tell you, hey, this is what the movie is really about. So as it plays out, I see this movie, or the story, as an inversion of the story of creation and the Garden of Eden. And if we put our spiritual lenses on, we can see that this story has something to say about ultimate meaning and even gender. Alright, so if you haven't seen the movie, let me just give a brief synopsis. I don't want to go into the whole thing. I'm not afraid to spoil it, but just for the sake of time, here's a brief synopsis, but just watch the movie for yourself. So there's this meteorite that hits this lighthouse somewhere. We don't know exactly where it is. And it causes some weird phenomenon. There's like this membrane or like field that emanates from the crash site. And what we know is that there's an alien that was on this meteorite that infects this whole area. And so over the course of a few years at least, there's been this group called the Southern Reach that is sending expeditions in to explore this area that they're calling the Shimmer. And all the teams that they send in there, usually they're soldiers, just never come back. And they're assuming that they're dead. And so we have our main character, Lena, played by Natalie Portman. And she's a biologist working at Johns Hopkins University. And her husband's a soldier, played by Oscar Isaac. And he had went on a mission with the Southern Reach to go into the Shimmer. She didn't know this. It was a top secret mission. And so apparently it's been like a year. And so she had thought he had died. She's grieving him. She doesn't know what happened. People are just acting like he's dead and she should move on. And then one day, while she's repainting their bedroom, he shows up. And she's trying to get answers from him, like, where were you? No one knew where you were. Your commanders didn't know. And he's got no answers for her. And then all of a sudden he gets ill. And on the way to the hospital in the ambulance, this military group pulls him over and brings him to the base for Southern Reach. And so she meets the psychologist, Dr. Ventress, who is the one who profiles all the people that go on the expeditions. And then she meets the team of female scientists and finds out they're the ones going on the next expedition, along with the psychologist herself. So she decides to join them, but she doesn't tell them that her husband was the man who just returned. He's the only person who's ever come out of one of the expeditions. Everyone else has gone missing or died or what, they don't know. And they can't get any answer from him because he's in a coma right now. So she goes on the expedition with them, and when she goes through this sort of like screen to enter this part of this wildlife reservation that's been consumed by the Shimmer, we see that the environment has been warped and changed. We see mutations, we see duplications of creatures and plants, we see plants growing on animals, we see animals that are sort of hybrids, and the team starts dealing with different problems, and some of them go crazy, some of them have mutations, they all end up getting mutations themselves in some way, and eventually till each of them die, and it's just Lena left. And she gets to the lighthouse with the Ventress, the psychologist, and they encounter the alien, and there's a battle with the alien who ends up becoming a doppelganger of Lena. And when she is able to destroy the doppelganger and burn down the lighthouse where the core of the infection is, then the Shimmer dissipates and she's able to reunite with her husband. So that's the gist of the plot, with a lot of spoilers, of course. And now I'm just going to make my points and provide my evidence as I go along. Now first, the movie starts off with showing a meteor landing on Earth, and it hits a lighthouse. And of course this meteor is carrying an alien life form, which goes on to infect and then possess the surrounding area. And so we see here how creation and humanity, but really all of creation, has been infected. Now clearly, with the spiritual lens on, you see that the alien is demonic. Usually, aliens are representative of demonic entities, of things that come in to infect us. You see this a lot in sci-fi movies or stories about infection, like aliens possessing people and infecting them, mind controlling them. So clearly seeing here how this alien lands and possesses. But it also shows how the demonic influence warps the world and our very nature. And what are the hallmarks of the demonic, of Satanism? If you understand Satanism as the religion, as a philosophy, you know that it's all about worship of self. Do as you will. It's about elevating oneself above the concept of God. A lot of Satanists might even say that they don't believe in God. They might be atheists to an extent, but they believe in elevation of self. And that's really at the root to everything we see going forward in the film. See, the infection of sin starts with pride, a desire to usurp God and seize eternal life by our own means. And this point is made pretty explicit early in the movie. And there's a scene that I think is key, that I didn't see the other film reviewers and analysts mention this scene, but when I saw this scene, I'm like, this is one of the key moments that really tells you what the story is about. So around the 18-minute mark, there's a flashback that gives us a big clue about the meaning of the story. Lena and Kane, they're laying in bed and they're just chatting, and they have like a skylight in their bedroom, and Kane is looking up and staring at the moon, and he's thinking about how strange it looks being out in the daytime, seeing the moon that when it's so light outside. And so she's like, I mean, like God made a mistake or something? And he says, but God doesn't make mistakes. She says, pretty sure he does. And so he's like, he's listening right now, don't you? And she goes on this sort of discourse. And she says, you take a cell, circumvent the Hayflick limit, you can prevent senescence. The Hayflick limit is the limit to the amount of times that a cell can divide and thus duplicate itself. And this is interesting because it's a callback to one of the opening scenes in the movie, because we find out that Lena is a biology teacher at Johns Hopkins University, and so she's training up medical students, and it starts off of her talking about cell division, and obviously a big clue to what this movie's about, because she is showing them footage of a cancer cell that just keeps dividing in an uncontrolled manner. But for normal cells, there's a limit to how many times a cell will divide. Now, normally a cell divides so that it will keep living on. And so senescence is the death of the cell, where it hits its limit and it ages and it dies. But what she says, if you take a cell and if we can find a way to circumvent that limit, we can prevent senescence, we can prevent the death of the cell. And her husband isn't a scientist, so he's like, well, what do you mean? And she's like, it means the cell doesn't grow old. It becomes immortal. It keeps dividing. It doesn't die. We see aging as a natural process, but it's actually a fault in our genes. And so she's blaming God. She's saying this is a mistake he's made. And then he says, interestingly, this sounds like a little joke, but I think it's actually a key thing about their relationship. He says, I get really turned on when you patronize me. It's really hot. And she's like, well, without this Hayflick limit, I could keep looking this way forever. And he's like, okay, well, that could constitute a mistake. Kind of a key thing. What's a mistake? Well, a mistake, if you understand that biblically, is sin. It's because sin is to miss the mark. So, just a little quick insight right there. The next truth is that we've all been wounded by sin in the world, by this infection of sin. And as you examine deeper, you see how each of us have wounded ourselves and others. And you see this in the film when they're on boats and they're Lena and Shepard are talking. And we find out that each of the women are pretty much, they're already dead inside. They are dealing with some sort of tragedy or trauma or addiction, some sort of woundedness or loss, and they're going on a mission that they might not return from. And so what frees them to do that is that they already seem like they're dead inside. And you see that that's such a good illustration of how the wages of sin are death. And we get more of a picture of this in the flashback sequences of Lena's life. See, at first, the first flashback, we get this impression that she had a loving marriage. Her and her husband just would spend time cuddling and teasing each other and making love. But then we find out with each scene, we get more of a truth that is a bit of a misdirection. But then we find out in the next flashback sequence that she is making love with her coworker, who we had seen earlier in the movie. But it doesn't tell us a timeline. So maybe there's part of you who's like, well, maybe that's after she came to the conclusion that her husband was dead. So maybe she wasn't cheating on her husband. But we did sort of have an indication that this guy had a wife. So we already knew that. But maybe he got the wife after he had a relationship with her. We don't know the timeline because there's been a whole year that has passed. So we don't know, but then later there's another flashback sequence and we find out, yep, they're definitely having an affair. He's cheating on his wife and she was cheating on her husband. So this all occurred prior to her husband being deployed to go into the Shimmer. And we also find out that she knows that he knows about the affair. And so that's also the big clue to tell us why she was determined to go into the Shimmer. Because she tells her husband, he's unconscious, she owes him, that she's going to make it right. And so we really see that she had a void. It's indicated in the flashback sequence that there was a breach in their relationship, and that with all of his missions in the army, he shared less and less and wouldn't open up. Which is odd because she also was former military, so you'd think that there would be that sort of bond where he could more freely share things with her. But I guess there was loss of intimacy in that regard. And so her response to his distance was the affair. And she tried to fill that void with sin. And if it led to shame. She's overwhelmed with guilt. She's burdened with guilt and shame. And you see in the one flashback sequence when she's talking with the man she's having the affair with, that her shame leads to contempt, which is a very common reaction or consequence of shame, is we feel contempt and disgust toward ourselves, toward that thing about ourselves that we're ashamed of, as well as to others that reveal that aspect of ourselves, that point a light at it. And so this guy she's having the affair with, her coworker, says, it's not me you hate, it's yourself. And she's like, no, it's you too. So there's the contempt for both self and other. And so in a subtle way, this film illustrates the rupture in the complementarity of God's design of male and female relationships. In both the movie and the book, this expedition into the Shimmer, or Area X, as it's called in the book, is comprised just of women. This in the book, we find out that this is the 12th expedition into Area X. And even though in the book it doesn't give us the names of the women, it just calls them by their career: psychologist, biologist, anthropologist, surveyor. But we know that they're all women. And it's the same for the movie, they're all females. And interestingly, though, they're all scientists. And there's only one with any military training is Lena. The rest are just scientists. They don't have a military escort going with them into this territory that has seemingly killed everyone else that's gone in. So they don't know what danger they're facing. And they're sending these women they have guns, but they don't have real training. You can tell when seeing with the crocodile, they weren't prepared to even shoot at the crocodile, except for Lena. And they don't have real intel on what to expect. So they're going in kind of blind and really not with the firepower and military might that they should should have. So I'm watching that, and I'm thinking, this is kind of weird. Also, they're scientists, but they're not even wearing hazmat suits. They're going into this infected area that could be toxic, and there could be, from these mutations, spores being released, and they're just walking up to them without any protection, without masks or anything on. And so probably like, all right, what's up with that? That's kind of weird. And most likely, the writers of both the book and the movie were probably intending to use that for propaganda reasons. A bunch of females going in, they're going to be the ones who explore this and solve the mystery, and it's about female empowerment. So clearly there's an agenda to show them as empowered. But interestingly, whether the writers intended this or not, this female empowerment plot point of just women going into this shimmer still fits a symbolic pattern, which kind of follows the biblical narrative. See, in the story, they weren't the first expedition. Before, it was men that went in. And her husband was the first one to emerge. But the thing is, he was not successful either. And so with Cain, we see the core sin of man, of Adam, and that is passivity. He was literally being patronized by his wife, and he was being cuckolded. He knows that his wife is cheating on him, and he does nothing about it. He doesn't confront her, he doesn't confront the man, he doesn't assert himself. And with each of the missions, he just grows more and more distant. So there's a passivity in this man, even though he's a soldier. I think he was a sergeant. I think he was a sergeant. So he's got rank, he should know authority. He's meant to be a man who's a warrior, and yet at home, he was passive. And so he wasn't taking up his mantle of authority and protecting his marriage and protecting his wife from falling into the wrong path of temptation. Instead, he just grows distant and aloof, and that is Adam's sin, who stood by Eve when she was tempted by the serpent. It says in the Bible, he was right there next to Eve, and he could have intervened. He could have been the one to remind her, as he should have, of what God told him about the commands regarding the trees. And with Lena, we see the core sin of Eve, that she's the one who was deceived and fell for temptation to become like God, to stand in judgment over the Creator, to say, no, the way you created us was not good enough. I'm not satisfied with the authority that you gave us as your images, as your representatives on earth. I want to be like God, even more so. And what do you see? The result in them is that they are barren and lifeless. Even though there's scenes of them showing affection, there's an undercurrent of lifelessness, just deadness between them. You see, God created us to reflect Him. But in this inversion, everything refracts. So when you get to this section where there's these plants that grow up to resemble humans, Josie, Tessa Thompson's character, she's the, I forget what type of scientist she is, but she's examining it, and she says, this world, everything is like a prism. It reflects everything back. And so she shows how we can't get any signals from the outside, and we can't transmit anything outside. So we see that in this inverted creation, it just reflects itself. There's no connection to the transcendent, no ability to send and receive signals outside this shimmer. There's no reaching upward to God. So just as Josie points out that the shimmer is like a prism, we see how when we are not directed toward God, the infinite, the divine, our creator, the designer, and we're not connected to Him, we turn inward towards self. In the book, they also say that Area X absorbs everything into itself. So there's this self-absorption. There's a focus on self and the creation, which is exactly what Paul says in Romans 1, that we turn from the Creator and we worship the creation. And speaking about self-absorption, another clue is the tattoo that mysteriously appears on Lena's arm. You see in her interrogation scene that she has an Ouroboros tattoo, the snake that is devouring itself, and it's in the shape of the infinity symbol. So it's the idea there of eternal, it's like both the cycle of life and death, and continually in a state of self-consumption. So there's that inward focus again that will eventually bring death. So there's another clue to my premise. And even the name of the organization that sends them into the Shimmer, Southern Reach, indicates this reaching downward into self and ultimately downward into hell. And you see, with Satan, he cannot create. He can only distort, mutate, and counterfeit, duplicate. So he can twist things and he can try to copy, but he cannot actually create. And when the relationship between male and female is corrupted, the imago Dei is marred. And it's fallen and distorted. God designed it so men and women create life through their union. But in the Shimmer, with focus on self, life is created only by mutation and duplication, by propagation of self. And this ultimately reaches its culmination with the ending, with Lena confronting the alien and the alien forming a doppelganger of her. And so it really comes to fruition right there, that the alien can only create life by duplicating. This brings us to the full meaning of the film. When we turn our attention inward towards self, the result, the inevitable result, is we fall into nihilism. We annihilate. Just as God said, when you sin, when you eat of that fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you will surely die. See, there's the giving in to temptation to be like God. There's the pride. There's the turning towards self, the self-consciousness that Adam and Eve had about their nakedness, this inward focus. That results in our death, our spiritual death. The movie makes this point almost explicitly when Lena is talking with Ventress. Lena asks her why her husband volunteered for a suicide mission, and she answers only in part. She's like, committing suicide? I'd say you're conflating suicide with self-destruction. Almost none of us commit suicide, and almost all of us self-destruct. In some way, in some part of our lives. We drink, or we smoke, we destabilize the good job, or the happy marriage. But these aren't decisions, they're impulses. And then she turns to Lena, who's a biologist. She's like, isn't self-destruction coded into us? Programmed into each cell? But the reality is, Ventress was on a suicide mission, which one of the scientists later says when Lena gets out of the Shimmer. She's like, she was never planning on coming back. She had cancer. She was dying. She never revealed that to anyone. So this cancer is another theme in the film. She had no intention of making it out. She wanted to die on her own terms. Now here's where I'm going to really show my nerdy side, because I also found it fascinating that they chose the name Ventress for the psychologist. In the book, like I said, none of the characters have names. It's like they're meant to be templates or archetypes even. I'm not sure. I never read the book, but it's a strange choice. But coincidentally, for the movie, they gave the psychologist the name Ventress. And Ventress is also the name of a character from Star Wars to Clone Wars. And she is a Sith apprentice of Count Dooku. And she comes from this tribe of female witches called the Night Sisters. Interestingly, in the book, the psychologist secretly used hypnotism on the team members to give them command words so that She can get them to do things that they wouldn't want to do, so they can act against their own wills. And that's kind of like being a sorceress. So, interesting connection there. And so that means that the psychologist was wielding dishonesty, just like the serpent in the garden. And like the serpent, she ended up becoming a puppet of the alien. When she reaches the lighthouse and she goes down into the tunnel and she encounters the real alien at the source of everything, she gets possessed fully. And so you really see how she was being used and manipulated. And just in the same way, Ventress was a puppet of the Sith Lord. So I found that, just as a Star Wars fan, to add a little more insight into the character. I have no idea if Alex Garland meant to do that. And if you need more symbols of the creation story, there's the fact that the point of impact is the lighthouse in the center of this wildlife reserve, which is in itself a garden. And so this lighthouse is clearly a symbol of the tree of life. But there's also a tunnel. It's not very clear in the movie that it's a tunnel. It's sort of like there's a hole in the lighthouse, and it leads into this sort of cave area. But in the book, it's more explicitly a tunnel. And that's where Lena and Ventress learn the truth, where they get enlightened. So they learn, they get knowledge. And in the book, the tunnel is like an inversion of the warehouse. It even has its own spiral staircase going down. And for some reason, the biologist in the book, she calls it a tower. Even though she's like, I don't know why I'm calling it a tower. It's a tunnel. Everyone else calls it a tunnel. We know that it goes straight down into the ground. But she's calling it a tower. So another inversion. And so if it's another tower, then we could say that this is an opposite tree from the tree of life. So this is clearly the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And in the book, along the walls of the tunnel are written words. There's this vine or like this sort of plant that grows along the walls, and there's words written on it. And apparently they're written by the alien. They call it the crawler in the book. It's like the lighthouse keeper was possessed by this alien. And there's words written in English and in cursive along this plant that grows along the wall of the tower. And now this is very cryptic, but these are what the words say. Where lies the strangling fruit that came from the hand of the sinner? I shall bring forth the seeds of the dead to share with the worms that gather in the darkness and surround the world with the power of their lives, while from the dim-lit halls of other places, other forms that could never be writhe for the patience of the few who have never seen or been seen. In the black water, with sun shining at midnight, those fruit shall come ripe, and in the darkness of that which is golden shall split open to reveal the revelation of the fatal softness in the earth. The shadows of the abyss are like the petals of a monstrous flower that shall blossom within the skull and expand the mind beyond what any man can bear. Now that's creepy. But you see in there themes of secret knowledge, of inversions of light and dark, the sun shining at midnight, of fruit that came from the hand of the sinner. It's all tying into the creation story. And it's written by the alien, the demonic. So we know that the mission of the demonic and of this world that focuses on self and excludes God and inverts everything that God created, the mission is to expand and consume everything. Unlike how the Garden of Eden became closed off after the fall and eventually disappears with the promise to return with a new paradise, instead this shimmer, this now newly infected world, keeps expanding to consume and take over the entire globe. And that's what we're dealing with, the curse that we all live under. The creation moans and groans for our redemption. Now you could be saying, if you saw the movie, No. But Lena's story follows the hero's journey myth. She goes down into the underworld and defeats her shadow, and she saves her love. But I'm going to say no, that's not what happens. She wasn't really victorious. In the end, we see her reunite with her husband, but he's a counterfeit. And she's not even the same person. So we see how sin literally changes our fundamental identity. Lena doesn't start the journey innocent. She transforms, but she actually doesn't improve. She still has the infection inside her. And as you look in their eyes, as they're embracing each other in this not very loving way, but they are embracing each other. But at the very end, and you look in their eyes, and they are just dead inside. This is not a fairy tale ending. This is our fate, as long as we remain disconnected from our source of life. When God is not our highest value and our aim, and we do not have that connection with Him, our focus is then on ourselves, and that is what leads to annihilation. Alright, so if you got any thoughts on my symbolic interpretation, please join me in the comments. Please like, share, and also I've just recently reached 100 subscribers. I know it seems like nothing, but I'm excited about that. And it's with the videos I make. I know the YouTube algorithms and just algorithms in general do not favor favor me. So I really appreciate it when you subscribe, when you share my videos, when you comment or hit the like button. I really just want to engage with people. That's why I started creating videos. I'm not necessarily trying to become popular, but I just really want to engage in some intellectual discourse on topics that may be forbidden. So please join me in the comment section, and God bless.